Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce's Ukraine War news update for the 6th of September 2023. Let's get to where we usually start, which is not here. We start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, or the usual caveats apply. You can find the caveats at the bottom of the description for the video. Right, 610 personnel lost. I think that is a heavy toll on the Russians. I have to say, I have an intuition that things are also fairly heavy for the Ukrainians at the moment. I think this counteroffensive is taking its toll. As you would expect anyway, they are attacking full stop, but they're also attacking really heavily defended positions with trench lines in every tree line, minefields, and then large trenches that are both manned or tank ditches, so on and so forth. So we can expect this to be really attritional for both sides. In certain places, the Russians have a large amount of drones. They have first-person view drones as well, and they also have ammunition advantage in places. Now we know that the Ukrainians have been saving up, or it appears that they've been stockpiling ammunition for this counteroffensive. I think in certain places they have an ammunition advantage and artillery advantage. I think that's particularly in the south, but in places like Bakhmut, the Russians still have that artillery advantage and the ammunition advantage there. So one can't extrapolate certain conclusions right across the front line. Each area of the front line is very different, and I think the Ukrainians will be taking their own losses. Obviously not at the rate, well, not obviously, but I don't think at the rate that the Russians are. However, as I said yesterday, the Ukrainians have a smaller army and they have a smaller population to draw on, so things will affect them more acutely. I think losses will affect them more acutely. Anyway, 610 losses for the Russians is a fairly sizable loss statistic. It's not up to the 1,000 that we have seen at the height of the Bakhmut offensive, but still challenging. 8 tanks, 12 APVs, again consistently fairly high loss numbers for those categories. I'd say that's long-term unsustainable. 36 artillery systems is a phenomenal loss, and we keep seeing these numbers, and the question should surely be, well, okay, is there evidence for that? I mean, these are massive losses on a daily basis, and actually there is a good deal of evidence on that statistic. We just have a look at, there is just a lot of video footage coming out. These are 2 Mr. B's, 2 A65 Giatsint B, a Mr. S, a BM21 Grad MLRS. Just a little video with all of those things. That's five pieces of artillery, including multiple launch rocket system in just that bit of footage. Then here we've got 3 D30 howitzers, a battery of howitzers taken out by cluster ammunition. So that's 3 taken out pretty much there. 1 particularly blown up, the other 2 I think damaged. But I was listening to Andrew Perpetua as well, and there's just talking about a lot of there's evidence of a lot of stuff being lost. Now, does that equate to 36 in a day? And considering there was pretty much the same yesterday, the day before, they are losing hand over fist, just huge amounts of artillery. I don't know. I can't talk to the exact numbers, but I'm fairly confident in concluding that the Russians are losing a lot of artillery on a daily basis. 1 MLRS system plotted up here, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system as well, 7 drones. That's not from last night. There was a significant wave of attacks last night, drone and missile, and we'll come to that later. 15 vehicles and fuel tanks, and on that subject, there are claims that the Russians are starting to use a lot. Well, we talked about this anyway, by point of fact that on the lost statistics every day, there's a lot of civilian trucks and cars even that are added on. So here we have a pro-Ukrainian source saying, due to problems, particularly this is from Mariupol, due to problems with bridges in Crimea, Mariupol turns into the main logistics hub through which main supplies of medicine and equipment pass for southern groups of Russians. apparently, according to some reports, many supplies are transported by car. And Trentelenko goes on one of his normal logistics threads talking about the demotorization of the Russian nation, but talks to this idea that logistics by road is challenging, and logistics, when you're taking a lot rather than by rail, especially for the Russian army, and when you have had so many military trucks taken out, then you're having to do that by car. It's just really inefficient, and civilian truck that's just really inefficient. Anyway, 15 vehicles on, and fuel tanks, and one piece of special equipment. Okay, let's go and see what confirmed losses have been totted up by Oryx here. We have 37 pieces of kit lost by the Russians. Let's have a look at the spreads. So a few tanks, but mainly infantry fighting vehicles and artillery. A few sort of drones added on to the end, and a couple of trucks. So there isn't anything from Andrew Perpetua today. He had a live stream. So anyway, 37 Russian losses against 15 Ukrainian losses. That includes that Challenger tank that we learned about yesterday. Now, apparently with the Challenger tank, is there anything else that's worthy of note there? Not particularly. So you can see, the ratio there is very much in favor of Ukraine. So as I've said, before we get onto the Challenger tank, as I've said, there is evidence, plenty of evidence. You can go and check these videos out using the links below in the description. There is evidence that the Russians are losing large numbers of artillery pieces. And then, of course, we come on to the Challenger 2. So apparently the Challenger 2, it hit a mine, and that immobilized it. The crew got out, and then it was hit with a Lancet. And of course, Lancets are a massive issue, really. But that's what lost the vehicle, because it was also what it says. Immobilized tank was unusually vulnerable because as switched off and on fire. I don't understand. The translation of that might be dodgy, but it was made particularly vulnerable after being immobilized. And that was the story kind of behind the Challenger. Mines are a problem. They're going to throw a track on the best of tanks for sure. Now, obviously, the Russians have been shouting about the loss of the Challenger 2 because it's the first recorded loss of the British kind of flagship tank, if you like. And as Shashank Joshi from The Economist here says, I don't think Russia really wants to get into the tank loss competition. So, yeah, they may shout about it. But if you look at the losses of tanks, Ukraine compared to Russia, the steepness, the gradient of the graph for the Russian losses is far worse than for the Ukrainians. And that is not a good look for the Russians. So they really, those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I just want to go back to the loss of Russian artillery pieces, because I think this is really important. It's significant. There's an excerpt from Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night. The audio isn't great for this bit with the guy he's talking to, but this is just worth listening to. So I'm going to play this for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I even heard some rumors, and I have to go back and look at that Mista video, that it was perhaps a 2S-35, which would be pretty surprising, or the replacement for the Mista, because it did look somewhat different than your standard 2S-19, but I'm not so sure. If it's one of the newer ones, then they're really running low. But yeah, I mean, the D-31 is the best example, because basically over the course...
They're talking about different types of Russian artillery here.
Course of 2 strikes in 2 areas, with just 10 or 11 rounds, they destroyed at least 3 D-30s and maybe damaged the rest. And that is what the cluster munitions were designed for. I mean, counterfire against artillery. And even in some of these D-30 positions...
Oh, we lost them.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so even in some of the D-30 positions, you saw that they were dug in, which helps a lot against HE, especially point detonating rounds that land nearby. But it really doesn't do anything if they don't have overhead cover against the cluster munitions. You're just putting it in a giant pile that's surrounded by dirt. So in essence, it kind of makes it worse.
Yeah.
But it's...
So a couple of interesting things here. So when they're using kind of high explosive artillery rounds and they're trying to hit artillery pieces. Sometimes they talk about this, like it can take, 10 rounds to get somewhere close to the gun, to the artillery piece. So you might talk about taking out 3. It might be even more than that. You might talk about 3 D30 howitzers taking like 100 artillery rounds to take them out. And here it takes like 5 cluster rounds to take them out. And that is just really assisting the Ukrainians in taking out significant pieces of artillery, as you can possibly see in the statistics that we're seeing over the last, well, I'd say 3 months now.
With just 10 rounds, because if you were to look at the tables and look at what 5 D30s would take for HE rounds, it would be something like 100 to 140 HE rounds to do that same amount of damage. So really effective use of the rounds.
Yeah, so sorry, 100 to 140 high explosive rounds. If you look at the tables, see how much you would use to take out, and they have these tables. I talked about this at the beginning of the war. It talks about the Russian tables for these, about how you need this amount of ammunition or ordnance to take out this amount of kit. And they've got these tables, and that's why the way that the Russians would do it is just flatten everywhere, and you'd calculate, this amount of artillery rounds flattening that area is what you need to take out these pieces of kit. So 100 to 140, standard high explosive artillery rounds compared to, 10 cluster munition rounds. It's just, vastly different.
Yikes. Yeah, and that reminds you of why drones are so nice, because it's like 100 and whatever to take out a gun or 3 guns, or like 5 drones. It depends on if they're in range, obviously, but often they are somehow. Because not yesterday, I can't remember what day it was, but we saw a bunch of Mistas all destroyed by like drones dropping grenades, not even FPV drones, just like grenade drops, taking out Mistas, which seems embarrassing to me to lose a Mista like that. And the what are they called, the Gvazdovkas or whatever, the carnations, whatever it is in Russian, taking out those with grenades as well, which it's so weird to me to take out artillery pieces using a drone that has like a 10-kilometer range. It seems like it shouldn't be possible. There's like these artillery guns have like 50-kilometer range. Like, what are they doing?
Well, and that's what, the Rusi report, or the Rusty report, Dr. Watling wrote about this extensively multiple times, about how, and a couple other authors too pointed out that Russians were coming up almost, 3 to 5 kilometers to the front to fire. Now, why would they do that? Perhaps they're running low on propellant charges.
I was talking about this myself just a couple of weeks ago, possibly dipping into what Watling had written in Rusi. But yeah, so why are the Russians bringing their artillery so close to the front lines such that they can be hit by grenade dropping drones that have a range of 10 kilometers? These artillery pieces should have a range of like 30 kilometers plus. Right, and yet they are being destroyed by drones in a way that, as they say here, is embarrassing for the Russians.
I don't necessarily think so. Perhaps they're running low on rocket-assisted propellant or some type of longer-range rounds. Probably not. What's the most likely is that they're really running into problems with their barrels. Again, still a huge problem, but a different problem. And seeing is believing, and so when you start mapping them and showing all these missiles destroyed at 3 to 5K from the front, it really makes you think, we live in a society where Russian barrels really must be going through a number, because there is no reason to put them that close.
I'm trying to.
And they go on and talk about that and talk about footage. So there is a lot of footage. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Russian artillery pieces are being attrited. And the question is why, in many cases, this is being done by equipment that shouldn't really be in range of taking out these Russian pieces of artillery, but they are. So is the main reason that their barrels are so degraded that they have to move them closer in order to get the range out of them and the accuracy that they need? Because you move them further back, and with the barrels being the rifling in the barrels being like worn away or whatever. These are the accuracy of these pieces of ordnance is just so poor that there's no point really firing them, so they have to bring them closer, and then they're much more vulnerable to being hit. Anyway, let's move on to a different topic. Sorry, I spent a bit too long on that. So the armed forces of Ukraine did not achieve their goals during the so-called counteroffensive in any directions. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu has said it. I mean, he famously said yesterday, I think it was, they lost 6 pieces of artillery, 6 things here, 6 things there, so they've lost 11 of these. You can't even do his maths right. Anyway, since the start of the offensive, their losses have exceeded 66,000 people and 7,600 weapons. So he's saying that in 3 months, they have 3 to 4 months, they have lost 66. The Ukrainians have lost 66,000 people and 7,600 weapons. That seems vastly over-egged there, as you would expect from the Russians. Now, this is really good news for the Ukrainians. So, deal revealed today interesting details about 2 Iris-T SLM. So these are short-range missile systems supplied by Germany and its own production capacity. So Deal is a manufacturer. Since entering service in Ukraine, the 2 air defense systems have been able to shoot down 110 Russian cruise missiles and drones. The Ukrainians are absolute professionals. They have a hit rate of 100% in Kyiv. So these Iris-T have got 100 after this amount of time in service, have got 100% hit rate in Kyiv. According to Deal CEO, a new Iris-T SLM system is waiting at Deal and will soon be delivered to Ukraine. This will be the 3rd system which Germany has delivered to Ukraine. Interesting facts about the production capacities. They've ramped up production and plans to be able to manufacture up to 8 systems per year in the near future. By 2024, the production of Iris-T SL systems is to be increased up to 500 missiles per year. So that is really good news for the Ukrainians. Now, here we have a Lancet striking a Book 1. M1. This is a Ukrainian book system being hit by a Lancet. This is a variability of Lancets here. So they are a massive problem. I'm not denying that. But there are also many times where Lancets just bounce off stuff. And here seems to be an example of a Lancet bouncing off the side of a Ukrainian piece of kit and, does absolutely nothing. And you see how close that is to those missiles. And yet, that nothing happened with that. So, that's good news for the Ukrainians in that instance, but these are issues. You do have issues with these. These are 40-kilometer range loitering munitions, so these can get much further behind than, say, the grenade-dropping 10-kilometer range quadcopters. Anyway, Bayraktars, as I've talked about, are making a bit of a comeback. Why are they making a bit of a comeback? Well, it seems that they've got freedom of movement due to the depletion of Russian air defenses in southern Ukraine. So this is, we're starting to see them have a lot of, a utility around this kind of area, the Kherson region and just along the sea here. Well, this is almost certainly a result of the Ukrainians attriting the Russian air defenses in this particular area. We know they've taken out some S-300s there. We know they've taken out an S-400 in this area. And that will, of course, allow them to operate with greater freedom, these Bayraktars, in this area. So that's why we are seeing more of them. Right, the General Staff. Today, the Russians launched 40 airstrikes and 51 multiple launch rockets attacks at positions of Ukrainian soldiers in populated areas. Now, that sounds, 40 airstrikes sounds like quite a lot, and it is. They are having particular joy, the Russians, with airstriking with the FAB along the Dnipro River, along the right bank of the Dnipro here, as it comes down. Remember, left and right in the direction the water flows. So the right bank is on this side. And that is where they are using a lot of them. Now, if you want to just have a look at a few statistics to do with airstrikes or sorties, the Ukrainians have had 14,000 sorties since the beginning of the war. And that sounds like a big number, right? You're like 14,000 air sorties. They've done a lot. Actually, that's very low. So in the Gulf War, in Desert Storm, I think the Allied forces would run 2,000 sorties a day. In other words, Ukraine, in over a year and a half, have done what the Allied forces did in Desert Storm in 1 week. 2,000 a day. The Ukrainians have done 14,000 over the course of the war. They are massively underpowered in air power, and this is why F-16s, just get them F-16s and get them to them bloody quickly, because they really, really need them, because as the Russians are having joy with their equivalent of the JDAM, the Ukrainians are using JDAMs, but far less than the Russians. They just don't have the ability to fire them as much. They don't have the airframes. They've got the pilots, as far as I can work out. They just don't have airframes. And yeah, JDAMs might be more easily jammable. These sort of guided, glided, small, dumb bombs that have been adapted so that they have guidance and glide capabilities. But they are slightly easier to jam for the Russians. They have better electronic warfare capabilities in that respect. But anyway, we'd like to see JDAMs be used a lot more widely. Right, a senior figure in the illegal Luhansk regime has been badly injured in an explosion at his home, and Ukraine's SBU is taking credit. So the FSB agent is known to be the financier of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic. He survived, but is in intensive care. There's quite a few bits of activity like this going on. This is how Ukrainian residents treat a car of a local collaborator on the left bank of the occupied Kherson region. The wheels of the car were punctured, and they were painted. The car had painted on it the Trident. So this is a very sort of pro-Russian car. Activity like this is just gonna let people know, that it's not all plain sailing in occupied territories. And I think this kind of activity is important for undermining Russian rule in these occupied regions. And then the car of the chief designer of GLONASS, so this is kind of the GPS equivalent type thing, was burned by unknown people in Moscow. Today, around 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 unknown persons set fire to Valery Babakov's Toyota Land Cruiser and fled the scene. Valery Babakov is the general director of the Navis Design Bureau, a company that produces equipment for GLONASS, GPS, Galileo, and their functional additions. So, it'd be interesting to know whether the Ukrainians are behind this or whether this is just Russians, being saboteurs just independently. Interesting. So that's happened. And then we've had sabotage in St. Petersburg. An IED exploded outside a military enlistment office. There's widespread fear in Russia of a second round of mobilization. So I wonder if you'll start seeing more of this going forward. This is the Nevsky district. Shot reports it contained 150 grams of explosives. And then Russia on fire. Blaze breaking out at Sibir petrochemical plant in Dzержinsk. Again, another example of how, I don't know, how sabotage is rife or carelessness is rife. But yeah, Russia has those challenges. Right, Ukraine had challenges last night because a big wave of drone and cruise missiles were released into Ukrainian airspace. Ukrainian Air Force says it intercepted 23 of 33 missiles and drones launched by Russia overnight. 15 of 25 Shahed. All seven cruise missiles were shot down, and an Iskander-M was shot down. So actually, all that got through were Shaheds, and it appears mainly in the Odessa area. That is, that's still 10 Shahed drones getting through, and they can cause quite a bit of damage. A large missile barrage on Kyiv this morning seems air defense caught most of it, judging from explosions. Odessa was not so lucky. Grain elevators, grain storage, and port infrastructure were hit for 3 hours. They are dead. It seems that Odessa and the surrounding ports are just being hammered by the Russians in what is an egregious attack on global food supplies. And the rest of the world should sit up and sit up and get angry about that. Tonight, Ukrainian drones attacked Putin's residence, according to the Moscow Times. A drone was shot down on the territory of Zavidovo National Park in the Tver region. I don't know if this is last night, but the night before, actually, near one of Putin's residences. I wonder how that would make Putin feel if something got through there. And then we've heard about tires being put on wings of big sort of Russian bombers. Well, it appears that this really is the case, that they are doing that. There's lots of satellite imagery of this on multiple planes now, and it appears to be a defense against drones, loitering munitions. It might well have decent effect, defensive capability. I guess if you can put a bunch of tires on top of a bomber, the hassle, it might be a bit of a hassle, but it's a damn sight cheaper than losing an entire bomber to a small drone. So that's what they're doing. There you go. Now, the drone that supposedly fell into Romanian territory, the Romanians have denied it fell into the Romanian territory. So this was a Shahed drone that was shot down. Whether it was flying over Romanian territory, I don't think can be known, but it certainly fell into, well, we're going to find out that it certainly fell into Romanian territory. Now, the Ukrainians have claimed they've got photographic evidence and intelligence that it fell into Romanian territory. The Romanians are saying nothing to see here. We're not worried. In other words, they don't want to react to Russia. But geo-confirmation from independent OSINT sources say that, there's all this analysis by GeoConfirm, which is a really good open source intelligence source. And they basically say, all the statements from Romania circulating. Here's all the information we have of where it dropped, and which side of the river. Basically, it's just which side of the river it was on, and it was clearly on one side of the river. And based on different investigation by different geolocators, based on the open source knowledge of how a Shahed works, based on the open source knowledge and the Ukrainian communication that they were able to shoot down and hit a lot of Shaheds. Conclusion: it's highly likely, which means they're pretty damn sure, a Russian Shahed crashed and exploded in Romania, likely after it was hit by Ukrainian AA anti-aircraft. So this is using intelligence and analysis language. So highly likely, I think that's what, is that like 75%? Depends, British and American, there's a 5% difference. But then drops to likely after it was hit by Ukrainian anti-aircraft defenses. So the probability of the latter part drops. Ukrainian statement is opposed to by Romanian statement. Based on our investigation, the Ukrainian statement is right. So in other words, open source analysis concludes that yes, the drone did drop into Romania's territory, and Romania have basically denied this. So make of that what you will. On to other bits and pieces. Flights on Czech L410 aircraft have been suspended in the Kamchatka territory due to a lack of spare parts. This is due to Western sanctions on the supply of parts for the aircraft. Kamchatka became the second Russian region that refused to operate Western aircraft. Previously, such aircraft were abandoned in the Komi Republic. So that is the effect of sanctions there. We'll get on to a bit of sanctions later. Something that really irritates the bejesus out of me. UAE. Anyway, here we should be consistent and ban even more things, says Andriy Norkin. So this is Russia wanting to be more like North Korea, right? Ban everything that doesn't agree with us, and then, oh, look, you're suddenly a totalitarian state. Anyway, to all my pro-Russian, my Kremlin trolls in the threads, so Solid Faux Life, Clive Engel, and Trevor, you know who you are. We all know who you are. Anyway, we know you're all paid by the Kremlin. So is this the kind of country you want, where you're just banning everything, you have no liberty? But I find this interesting. What's all this about? Well, it turns out that Oppenheimer, good film by the way, and Barbie have been banned because they don't fit in with the traditional narrative. But what's interesting with the whole banning of, say, something like Barbie, and they complain about it not being in line, Disney's trying to thrust their ideas down our throats. But by banning it, you're not allowing the viewers to make that decision themselves. In other words, the state is thrusting their opinions and views down the throat of the Russian public. So it's a massive, massive dollop of hypocrisy there. So Julia Davis from Russian Media Monitor here says, head of RT Margarita Simonyan admits that for 10 years or more, she's been dreaming about censorship, banning Western media and Russia becoming like China in achieving total information control. Most of all, Simonyan doesn't want the idea of freedom to ever come back to Moscow. A global, well-coordinated info machine, etc. I mean, we could go through what she actually says there, and the other people on the show. I just want to drop into this idea of Barbie being banned and Oppenheimer being banned in Russia. Now, what's interesting here is that the truth actually came out about why it's been banned. So the claim is that they were banned because they, it doesn't fit in with their narrative and blah blah blah. But then one of the panelists then actually let out why it was really banned. So he said, "We aren't showing them," he says, "because Warner Brothers didn't offer it for us to show. We can't show it, but it's not that we banned it. It's actually the Warner Brothers haven't even distributed it to Russia, because obviously there's effectively sanctioning or pulling out of Russia. We banned something that wasn't even offered to us." And as soon as he said that, the guy's like, no, pardon, we're out of time, and then cut it off. So the guy didn't get to really expand on the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is that is not as they are saying it, of course. This is the point that I was making here. The really inane part of them saying Disney can't push values on the public, let the public decide. Well, the host wants to push Russian values on the public, despite over 600 theatres showing pirated copies of Barbie, which Russians want to see. So the whole idea is that they're trying to control what people see, rather than or don't see. And that's their answer to Barbie thrusting their view, Warner Brothers or Disney thrusting their views on the public. Okay, well, how about you let the public decide this? And it turns out the public actually genuinely want to see it. And so it's being shown in 600 theatres using pirated copies. And so banning that then becomes, if they are really interested in banning that, then they are banning illegally gained stuff. Anyway, it's just a whole hot mess here, involving intellectual property and totalitarian kind of censorship, and it's just Russia. Goodness me, who knows what to make of it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll be doing part 2 to this shortly. Take care. Speak soon.